Man, have you ever felt the sting of being completely invisible in your own family? Like no matter how much you tried, how much you sacrificed, it never counted? That was me, every holiday, every birthday, every family dinner. My kids and I were the extras, the ones you pretended to see but really did not. My parents would make these grand gestures, but the words they whispered behind their smiles cut deeper than any knife. There is no room for your kids, they said. They just complicate things. I swallowed hard each time, forcing my voice to stay calm, hiding the rage boiling inside. But I swear I had been planning quietly while they laughed and ignored us. It started with the holidays. Every year we were either too busy or too far away. My ex-husband's family always got the front row. The tables, the traditions. My children, brilliant, kind, funny, were shuffled to the corners, barely offered a plate. Their presence tolerated rather than celebrated. One Christmas, I remember watching my daughter reach for a slice of pie that my sister's kids had snatched before she could even say please. My son's little hands trembled as he tried to carry a plate back to our tiny table in the kitchen, and I could feel my chest tighten like it would burst. I wanted to scream, to slap the smug smiles off their faces, but I stayed quiet. That night, I promised myself something big, something they would never see coming. I started small at first. I documented everything, the texts where my mother told me we should not bother, coming over, the messages from my father criticizing my parenting choices, the countless subtle insults my sister threw around, as if she were some perfect judge of our worth. I kept a folder on my laptop, a secret, meticulous archive of humiliation. I did not know what I would do with it yet, but I knew I needed leverage. I needed proof that I had not imagined their cruelty. Months passed. I saved, invested, and quietly built a life that did not depend on their approval. I signed contracts, learned new skills, made connections, and all the while, I watched. I watched how they treated others, how arrogant my sister had grown, how my parents flaunted their money like it justified their cruelty. My children thrived in school, their little awards stacking up like quiet victories. Each time my daughter brought home a certificate for excellence or my son won a school competition, I felt a spark of joy that no holiday humiliation could extinguish. Then came the tipping point. My sister decided to host a massive holiday party, the kind that made the neighborhood talk for weeks. Invitations went out and naturally ours never came. That was the moment I realized subtlety was no longer enough. If I was going to make them understand, I needed impact. I began my plan in the shadows, legal filings, real estate moves, and a few carefully orchestrated alliances with people my family thought they controlled. They had assumed loyalty where there was none. I had quietly built my own network, a web they could not see. The day of the party, I showed up. Not crashing, not begging, but arriving with purpose. My children in tow, dresses pressed, shoes polished, and eyes shining with quiet confidence. I had secured the venue next door for a surprise announcement. As my sister greeted her guests, smug and radiant, I walked into the room adjacent and began broadcasting live, a seamless, flawless projection of my life, my successes, my children's achievements. The audio fed into the main hall. Every congratulatory message, every award, every word of love and pride echoed through their walls. My kids, the ones they had dismissed, were celebrated in real time by hundreds of neighbors, friends, and colleagues. I watched my sister freeze, her smile faltering as she realized she could no longer control the narrative. My parents, seated at the table, could only stare, mouths open, as the story of my children's brilliance, of our independent success, unfolded louder than their judgments. For once, there was no hiding, no whispering in the kitchen. Everything they had denied or belittled was now undeniable. Then came the legal maneuver I had set in motion months prior. I had quietly acquired a property that my sister had coveted for years, the one she thought she would inherit through family connections. I signed the papers, the transaction completed, and the announcement was timed perfectly with the live feed. I had purchased the house, legally, right under their noses. They had assumed I was powerless. They had assumed I could not act. And now, standing there, they realized how wrong they had been. The aftermath was delicious. My father tried to speak, to assert control, but his words bounced off me. "You do not understand the consequences," he said. I looked him squarely in the eye. "I understand more than you ever thought I could," I replied. My mother tried to intervene, her voice trembling. "Maybe we should talk later," she said. I smiled, calm, collected. "There is nothing to discuss. The proof is right here." My sister, red-faced, tried to salvage her dignity. "This is ridiculous. You cannot just—" I cut her off. "I can, and I did. You underestimated us for years, and now you see what happens when your assumptions are wrong." My kids laughed. Light and free, no longer hidden, no longer secondary, their joy filled the space like sunlight. The best kind of revenge, undeniable, unassailable, and beautifully unapologetic. Weeks later, I received emails from family friends, curious, apologetic, almost embarrassed on behalf of my relatives. Invitations to gatherings. I had once been excluded from started arriving, but I ignored them. I had no interest in validation from people who had spent years diminishing me and my children. My life had become larger than their pettiness. I hosted my own events, invited friends and allies, and my children thrived in this environment of acceptance and admiration. It was then that I realized the true power of quiet preparation, patience, and strategic action. I had not needed to yell, to fight publicly, to descend into drama. I had built a foundation that was solid, undeniable, and permanent. My children's achievements, our legal victories, and the respect we had earned were shields against any attempt to belittle or dismiss us again. And the most satisfying part? Watching them squirm, watching the realization settle in that the world had changed, and their power over us was gone. My sister, once brash and arrogant, now had to navigate carefully, aware that her usual tactics would not work. My father, still steeped in ego, could only watch silently. My mother, finally seeing the consequences of years of complicity, reached out, but I held my boundaries. Months passed, the holidays returned, and this time my children were not extras. They were central, celebrated, loved, and visible. They were the reason our gatherings now radiated warmth and pride. The reason my family had to confront their own cruelty and arrogance. And me? I had learned that revenge is not about humiliation. It is about reclamation. It is about building a life so strong, so undeniable, that those who tried to erase you are forced to recognize your existence, even if grudgingly. I walk through life now with my head held high, my children beside me, knowing that we are untouchable in the ways that truly matter. And the haunting truth lingers in my mind. Sometimes, the people who try to erase you are the ones who make your rise inevitable. And the best revenge is the life you build while they still believe. They hold all the power. The holidays came again, and my family called, hesitant, awkward, unsure. I smiled and sent an invitation on my terms. My children, now the center of attention, laughed and hugged friends. Free from fear, free from judgment. My family would have to adjust or stay behind. And I, for the first time, felt completely untouchable. My space finally claimed, my voice finally heard, my revenge quietly complete. That day, I realized the ultimate truth. Power is not in control over others, but in the undeniable creation of your own space, your own life, your own rules. And for the first time, I felt a peace so profound it was almost terrifying in its completeness. My family had been shown the space, and I was finally entirely free. I remember the first time I truly felt the weight of my family's rejection. It was subtle, almost invisible, like a shadow in the corner of the room that I could never quite ignore. Every family gathering, every holiday, it was the same story. My children and I were present but irrelevant. My parents would smile at me, but their eyes always flicked to my sister, their favorite, their successful child. My kids would try to join conversations, asking questions, telling stories, and my sister's children would roll their eyes, interrupt or ignore them entirely. I forced a smile, telling myself it did not matter. But inside, the ache was relentless. Years of these subtle humiliations had hardened me. I had tried to speak up, to explain that my children deserved love and respect, that we were not just inconvenient extras in their perfect little family narrative. But every attempt was met with condescension. "You are too sensitive," my mother would say, brushing off my pain as though it were insignificant. My father would sigh, as if parenting my children was a burden he could not fathom, and my sister would smirk, as if my frustration were proof of my inadequacy. That day, I decided I would no longer tolerate their small cruelties. I would take control in a way they could never anticipate. I began by researching. Hours upon hours, late nights where my children slept and I scrolled through public records, legal documents, and old contracts. I discovered loopholes, properties, and investments that my family had long assumed I could never access. They had believed their wealth and influence insulated them from my reach. They were wrong. I quietly started building my own network, finding allies in places they had overlooked, people who respected competence and integrity, not just bloodlines. The turning point came when my sister purchased a condo in a prime location, one that she flaunted openly, mocking my inability to afford anything comparable. She would post pictures on social media, showing off her lavish furnishings and the laughter of her perfect family. My kids and I were excluded, but I made mental notes every square inch, every address, every pattern. Months later, using a combination of legal research and quiet negotiation, I acquired the very same property, entirely legally without her knowledge. I had waited for the right moment to reveal it, and that moment had to be perfect. The first step was public perception. I could have confronted my sister privately, but that would have been too easy, too dismissible. Instead, I orchestrated a gathering, an event that appeared coincidental. Neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, all unaware of the underlying strategy, were invited. My children were groomed and polished, laughter rehearsed, smiles natural but perfectly timed. I allowed my sister to believe the day would be another opportunity for her to show off, for her to assert dominance in the social sphere. As the event unfolded, I let the narrative slip subtly into the room. Compliments for my children, questions about their achievements, curiosity about our move into a new home, all arranged with precise timing. The guests, unaware of the stakes, remarked on our success, our independence, our charm. My sister's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, her eyes darting between guests. Between my children, between me, she could feel, though she could not articulate, that the balance of power had shifted. Then came the revelation. With flawless timing, I invited my sister to tour our new property, casually mentioning it as though it were a small detail, an aside. Her reaction was instantaneous. A mixture of disbelief, rage, and humiliation played across her face, her carefully constructed facade crumbling in the presence of undeniable proof. The condo she had coveted, that symbol of her superiority, was now ours. I did not gloat. I let the silence speak. Her friends whispered. Her children looked confused, and my kids beamed, unburdened by years of exclusion. The legal confirmation came shortly after. My sister attempted to dispute the acquisition, claiming underhanded tactics or favoritism. But all documentation was pristine, irrefutable, and public. Every attempt she made to assert dominance, to reclaim what she believed was hers, failed. My parents, watching from the sidelines, could only offer empty threats and frustrated sighs. They had underestimated me for years, assumed that my quiet resilience meant submission. That assumption was the foundation of my strategy. Over the next few months, I continued to assert control over our narrative. I hosted gatherings in the new condo, ensuring that my children were visible, celebrated and appreciated. Friends and neighbors remarked on their intelligence, charm, and kindness, unaware of the long history of exclusion. I watched my sister squirm at each acknowledgement, her attempts at subtle sabotage, failing as my careful preparation and legal acumen held firm. My parents attempted to intervene, pleading for reconciliation, trying to assert moral authority, but I held boundaries firmly. I explained that respect had to be earned, not demanded, and that years of neglect and humiliation had consequences. My father tried to lecture, my mother tried to charm, but I remained steadfast. My children were finally in a space where they were celebrated, safe from the dismissive and cruel remarks that had defined our past interactions. The psychological aspect of my plan became apparent as my family began to realize the extent of their misjudgment. My sister, once arrogant and dismissive, now approached interactions with caution, measuring her words, attempting diplomacy where she had previously relied on dominance. My parents, for the first time, confronted the results of their favoritism, their cruelty, and their underestimation of my capabilities. At school events, social gatherings, and community functions, my children were no longer overlooked. They were central, recognized, and praised. I had transformed the narrative from one of exclusion to one of undeniable presence. My family had to acknowledge it, whether they liked it or not. Every compliment, every acknowledgement from outsiders was a quiet victory, a reaffirmation of the years of preparation and planning I had invested. The final act of my plan involved orchestrating a public acknowledgement of our achievements. I invited local press, community leaders, and mutual acquaintances to a celebration at the condo. Awards, recognitions, and testimonials highlighted the success and character of my children. My sister attended reluctantly, my parents followed, tense and unsure. As speeches were made, as accolades were given, the atmosphere shifted. My children stood at the center of attention, radiant and proud, while my family grappled with the realization that their attempts to control and dismiss us had failed spectacularly. In the months following, my family adjusted their behavior, cautiously respectful, but the dynamic had irrevocably changed. I had not sought revenge through humiliation. Instead, I had built an undeniable life, one that commanded recognition and respect. My children thrived in this environment, confident and empowered, no longer burdened by the weight of exclusion. I continued to document every interaction, every subtle attempt at dominance or manipulation, ensuring that our victories were secure and permanent. My sister's attempts at undermining us became increasingly transparent and ineffective as my careful planning and legal safeguards protected our position. Looking back, I realized that the true victory was not in overt confrontation, but in the creation of a life that my family could not ignore, a life that demanded acknowledgement. The lessons learned, the boundaries established, and the empowerment of my children created a foundation that would withstand future attempts at exclusion or control. The holidays returned, and for the first time, my children were celebrated, their achievements recognized, their presence desired. Invitations from previously dismissive relatives arrived, tentative and awkward, but I now held the power to accept or decline, to set the terms. I chose wisely, ensuring that our gatherings prioritized genuine affection and recognition rather than obligation or pretense. Through careful planning, resilience, and strategic action, I transformed years of exclusion and humiliation into a foundation of empowerment and undeniable presence. My family had to reckon with the consequences of their choices, and my children, at the center of our new life, thrived in a world that finally recognized their worth. And in the quiet moments, when I reflect on the journey from exclusion to empowerment, I understand that true revenge is not about breaking others. It is about building yourself and those you love into a force that cannot be dismissed, cannot be undermined, and cannot be ignored. My children's laughter, their accomplishments, and our shared pride are the ultimate testament to resilience and the most profound form of victory.